So once again, good afternoon, everyone. Our group will are actually tasked to discuss Chapter 6, Action for Breach of Contracts of Sales of Goods. It is actually based on the Articles 1594 up to 1599 of the Civil Code of the Philippines. And here, it was focused on Article, I will discuss Article 1594. It is focus on the governing law for the action for breaches of the contract of sales of goods, no? And it is actually governed primarily by the provision of law on sales. And take note that in these provisions, the sales of real property are not applicable. So there is another discussions or provisions that are applicable for the sales of the real property. So now here there are actions available in a case of breach, no? By the seller, there are three. First, the action by the seller for the payment of the price that will also discuss under Article 1595. Second one, the action by the seller for the damages for the non-acceptance of the goods under Article 1596. Third one, the action by the seller for the rescissions of the contract for the breach thereof. This is under Article 1597. Now, we have also on the part of the buyer, there are two. Here is the actions by the buyer for the specific performance that we'll discuss under Article 1598. And the second one is the action by the buyer for the rescissions or damages for breach of warranty under Article 1599. These actions, no, and specific articles will also discuss by my other classmate or my other groups. Now I will be focused or proceed to the discussions of the Article 1595, which is the action by the seller for the payment of the price. Now, here we have this three paragraphs, no? So in these three paragraphs, there are three instances when the seller can maintain an action for the price of the goods under the contract of sales. Number one here is the goods has passed to the buyer and he wrongfully neglect or refuses to pay for the goods. We will discuss these instances no later on so that we have understanding no on the article 1595. Now the second instances is the price is payable on a certain day irrespective of delivery or of transfer of title. The third one is the good has not passed if they cannot readily be resold for a reasonable price and if the buyer refuses to receive them. So let's discuss first the first instance, no, which when the ownership of the goods has passed to the buyer and he wrongfully neglect or refuses to pay for the prices. There are actually two requisites. First is ownership of the goods has passed to the buyer, and the second one, the buyer wrongfully refuses or neglect to pay according to the to terms of the contracts, no. And uh in the in the case of lawyers and cooperative publishing co versus what we call this Tabora. No, here the buyer actually was still required to pay the books, no, that were destroyed in a fire because the contract specified that the buyer bore the risk of loss after delivery, implying ownership transfer had occurred. The seller could maintain an action for the price under the principle now reflected in Article 1595, no? In this scenario, actually, the contract actually specified that at the time that the seller delivered the goods to the buyer now has the ownership or has liable whatever happened to the goods under their supervisions, no? This is actually what the emphasis no on the first paragraph of Article 1595. Now let's go to paragraph 2, no, the second instance. So the price is payable on a certain day, and the buyer actually wrongfully neglects for or refuses to pay such price, irrespective of delivery or of transfer of the title. Now there are two requisites again here. So first, the price is payable on a certain day, irrespective of the delivery or transfer of title. No, this is actually opposite to the first scenario. No, here is no delivery pa. No, there is no delivery of the goods. Let's continue. Second is the buyer wrongfully refuses or neglect to pay on the agreed date. So, uh, for example, S and B agree that the payment should be on April 15 and the delivery is on April 30. So now if B is to fails no to pay on April 15, which is this is part of their agreement that the buyer or B should pay the goods on April 15 regardless of no delivery kasi they agree that the delivery will be on April 30. Now, can S so B of non-payment of the goods? Yes, no? Because even without delivering the goods, no, the buyer there is already an agreement, established agreement that the buyer should pay, no, the goods even that there is no delivery of the goods. But however, there are also some defense on the buyer side if the seller has inability or intent not to perform the agreement, no, or they don't want to deliver the goods, no, that could be a reasonable way of the buyer to refuse to pay, no, those specific goods. Now let's go to the on credits, no. This is actually common for for more of the company. So it is common for the seller to give credit for the price, but it is not common for the buyer to give credit for the goods. It may, however, happen that the buyer promised to pay the price before acquiring the ownership or even the possessions of the goods. So here, actually, the seller grant credits for the price, no? Nangutang si buyer to kay seller. And the buyer promised to pay before taking the possession. So let's say for example, B agrees to pay 100,000 on June 1. Even though goods are for delivery on June 15, if B does not pay June 1, else may still sue, no? B for non-payment of 100,000 as they agree that the buyer or B or uh, B should pay on June 1, no? So next one we have here the second paragraph, third paragraph. Goods cannot readily be resold for a reasonable price and the buyer wrongfully refuses to accept them even without before the ownership in the goods has passed in pass, no? So there are requisite as well. So first is there is no transfer of ownership to the buyer. Second one, the good have been manufactured. Third, the good cannot be readily resold for reasonable price, and the seller offers to deliver goods to the buyer, and the buyer refuses to receive the goods, and the seller now notifies the buyer that seller holds good as bail for the buyer. For example, S manufactures 1,000 custom made bottles with B's logo. Now, B refuses to accept the bottle and bottles cannot be sold elsewhere kasi nga it's already customized, no, intended for the company since there is a logo, no, input in the battles. No, S notify B. Now S will notify B. He's holding the goods as bail. So S may sue for the full price. Yes, because the battle cannot be resolved. It could not the S no the manufacturer S cannot be divert this bottles no goods to the other company. Why? Because it's customized made for the specific requirements to B, not for the other company. So B will be liable for this scenario. Now, where ownership in goods has not passed. So from the above, it can be, no, from the other previous scenario, it can be deduced that the seller cannot maintain an action for the price if the ownership in the goods has not passed to the buyer first, unless the price is payable on a certain day, or second, unless the good cannot readily be resold for a certain price and the provision of the Article 1596 paragraph 4 are not applicable. The other one, it must be noted that under Article 1588, the title to the goods passes to the buyer from the moment they are placed at his disposal. When he refuses to accept them is without just cause, the seller may therefore bring an action for the price upon wrongful refusal of the buyer to accept. Now, in order for us to understand more on this subject, on these provisions, my other group will be discuss the next provisions. Thank you.
Good day, good evening, attorney and classmates. I am Raja Cordero Bastunan, and I will be discussing Article 1596 of the Civil Code of the Philippines. Chapter 6 covers the actions for breach of contract, and Article 1596 it provides the circumstances of the seller's right of action for damages. Paragraph 1 of the Article 1596 provides for the right of the seller to maintain an action for damages when the buyer, without legal cause, refuses to accept and pay for the goods he agreed to buy. This is what we call non acceptance of the goods by the buyer. So, in this circumstance, there is no delivery yet to the buyer. So, unlike in Article 1595, wherein the ownership of the goods has already transferred to the buyer, and the remedy is action for price. In this instance, the remedy is action for damages. Article 1596 provides for the measures of damages to which the seller is entitled, and it includes the following. First, difference between the contract price and market price. Second, full amount of damage. Third, proximate damage. So in Article 1596, the measure of damages is the estimated loss directly and naturally resulting in the ordinary course of events from the buyer's breach of contract. When there is an available market for the goods in question, the measure of damages is the difference between the contract price and the market or current price. At the time are times when the goods ought to have been accepted, or if no time was fixed for acceptance, then at the time of the refusal to accept. And there should be an absence of special circumstances showing proximate damage of a different amount. So let's say, for example, Ma'am Liza Toledo agreed to sell to Melchor Dignadice 10 boxes of Fuji apple for 10,000 to be delivered on December 15. Then, on December 15, Mom Lisa delivered the apples to Melchor. However, Melchor refused to accept the apples. And on December 15, the market price of the Fuji apples is only 7,000. So our contract price is 10,000. However, the market price on December 15 is only 7,000. Therefore, Mom Lisa is entitled to damages of 3,000. Now, what if there was no time fixed for the delivery, or the date was not specifically mentioned on the contract? Then the basis of the time where we will base the market price will be on the time of the refusal to accept. The 3,000 damage is the profit that Mom Lisa could have realized if the sale pushed through. Now, what if on the date of the refusal to accept, or on the date that they agreed to deliver the Fuji apples, the current market price is 15,000. So the market price is higher than the contract price. Then in that case, Mom Lisa suffered no damages and can only recover nominal damages. It is the burden of the seller to prove what damage, if any, he suffered. It is incumbent upon Ma'am Lisa to show that the market value of the goods is less than the contract price in order to make out a case for recovery of more than the nominal damages. Now, what if there is no available market in which the goods can be sold at that time? Then the seller will be entitled to the full amount of damage which he has really sustained by a breach of the contract. If Melchor or the buyer acted in bad faith, this can be considered as a special circumstance. He is liable for consequential damages incurred by the seller, or in our case, Mom Lisa, such as attorney's fee, if Mom Lisa will hire a lawyer to pursue Melchor. So that is pursuant to paragraph 3, or that is the proximate damage. It allows the seller, under special circumstances, proximate damages of a greater amount than the difference between the contract price and market price, when such damages may be reasonably attributed to the non-performance of the obligation. Another circumstance under Article 1596, which allows the seller action for damages, is the repudiation or countermand. So these are the circumstances under repudiation. The contract is not yet fully performed by the seller since goods were not yet finished or manufactured. Labor or expense of a material amount is necessary on the part of the seller to enable him to fulfill his obligations. The buyer repudiates the contract or notifies the seller to proceed not further with it. When a buyer repudiates the contract, the buyer tells the seller to stop the performance. The law protects the seller. Article 1596, paragraph 4 allows the seller to recover damages that reflect these components or circumstances. Article 1596 allows the seller to recover for the value of work already done plus the expenses already incurred. This covers everything the seller has already invested before learning that the buyer changed their mind. Now, this includes the cost of materials already purchased, labor already performed, services already paid, and any other expenditures directly necessary to fulfill the order. So, other than the value of the work already done and the expenses incurred, Article 1596 also allow the recovery of the expected profits had the transaction been completed. So this is the lost profit calculated as the difference between the contract price and the total cost of the seller. The total cost the seller would have spent to complete the goods. So this follows the rule that damages comprehend not only the actual loss suffered, but also the unrealized profit. So again, the measure of damages to which the seller is entitled would include the labor performed and expenses incurred for materials before receiving notice of the buyer's repudiation and the profit he would have realized if the sale have been fully performed. So let's say, again, Melchor ordered 1,000 custom metal frames from Mom Lisa. The contract price is 500,000 and Mom Lisa's total projected cost to complete the metal frames is 350,000 pesos. So the expected profit is 150,000. Before cancellation, Mom Lisa had already purchased materials worth 80,000 and performed labor worth 40,000. Then Melchor cancels the order and instructs Mom Lisa to stop production. So pursuant to Article 1596, the damages that Mom Lisa may claim under Article 1596, paragraph 4, first is the labor and expenses already incurred. So that's the materials already bought amounting to 80,000 plus labor already performed in the amount of 40,000. So that's 120,000 plus the profit that Mom Lisa would have realized, which is 150,000 pesos. Therefore, the total damages that Mom Lisa could claim is 270,000 pesos. So here, the seller does not need to finish the goods to recover damages. The buyer's repudiation triggers the right to damage even before the performance was completed. So that's all for Article 1596. Good day, good evening, and thank you. And I would like to apologize because I have a persistent cough. So again, thank you and good evening.
Moving on to Article 1597, where the goods have not been delivered to the buyer and the buyer has repudiated the contract of sale or has manifested his inability to perform his obligations thereunder or has committed a breach thereof, the seller may totally rescind the contract of sale by giving notice of his election so to do to the buyer. So Article 57 basically gives the seller a special right of unilateral rescission, provided that no delivery has yet been made. Or this article gives the seller the power to rescind a contract of sale before the goods have been delivered when the buyer is at fault. Now let's learn when the seller may rescind the contract of sale in case there is no delivery yet. So the seller may rescind when first or number one when buyer has repudiated the contract of sale. So repudiation means a clear refusal to perform or a definite statement that he no longer intends to proceed with the sale. For example, buyer A writes to seller B stating he withdraws from the purchase. Next, number two, when buyer has manifested his inability to perform his obligations thereunder. So here, this may be financial inability like insolvency, bankruptcy, or failure to pay installments. Or it can also be practical inability like loss of capacity to comply with obligations. Next, number three, when buyer has committed a breach of the contract of sale. So here it's a substantial breach and not a slight or trivial one. Examples are failure to provide required security or documentation, or it can be repeated failure to pay agreed partial payments. The notice must be given to the buyer to totally rescind the contract. And if the goods have been delivered, the seller may recover the value of what he has given. Again, to validly rescind, the seller must give a notice to the buyer of the election to rescind. So there's no court action or no court action is required, although the seller may file one if it is needed. So what are the effects of rescission or the effects of rescission? Once validly rescinded, the contract is totally extinguished. The seller keeps the goods since no delivery occurred. The buyer may recover what he has paid minus the damages, and seller may also sue for damages caused by the buyer's breach. Now let's go to Article 1598, where the seller has broken contract to deliver specific or a certain goods. A court may, on the application of the buyer, direct that the contract shall be performed specifically without giving the seller the option of retaining the goods on payment of damages. The judgment or decree may be unconditional or upon such terms and conditions as to damages, payment of the price, and otherwise as the court may deem just. So Article 1598 gives the buyer the right to demand specific performance when the seller breaches a contract to deliver specific or a certain goods. So buyer's right to specific performance, Article 1598. Again, remember, Article 1598 applies only to a specific or a certain good. So when we say a specific goods, these are goods identified and individualized at the time the contract is made. So you can point to them and say that one. For example, a car with plate number ABC123. So it's very specific. Another example is a unique collectible item, such as a signed basketball jersey, which was worn in a specific game. So those are the examples of specific goods. Next is a certain goods. So these goods become identified after the contract when they are set aside, labeled, or distinguished from a larger mass. So originally, a certain or these goods are generic. For example, 100 sacks of rice. So meaning they are not individually specified. But once they are selected, separated, or marked, they change character and become a certain. So the sacks are marked now as, for example, order for one, or order for Anna. So it's no longer 100 sacks. It now became order for one, order for Anna. So from generic to specific. Okay, next, in reciprocal obligations, the choice belongs to the injured party. So principles of reciprocal obligations. So the civil code provides that in reciprocal obligations, such as a contract of sale, the injured party, not the party in breach, has the choice of remedies. So these remedies includes either fulfillment or specific performance, or it can also be rescission of the contract. Of course, with damages in either case. Thus, a seller who fails to deliver cannot defeat the buyer's choice by attempting to rescind the contract unilaterally, and the power belongs to the buyer as the aggrieved party. Next, Article 1598 grants the buyer the specific remedy when the seller violates the obligation to deliver or ascertained to deliver specific or ascertained things. Now, Article 1598 grants to the buyer the special right to demand specific performance enforceable through a court order. So this allows the buyer to obtain the exact goods contracted for, particularly when their unique character or identity makes monetary compensation inadequate. So this gives the buyer the right to ask the court to force the seller to deliver the exact goods agreed upon, especially when the goods are unique and cannot be replaced by money. For example, you purchased a limited edition signed basketball jersey or collectibles signed basketball jersey worn by a famous player in a specific game. So here the seller backs out. So you can demand that the seller turn over that exact jersey because, again, no other will have the same value. All right. Next, the court may grant specific performance or court has discretion. So under Article 1598, the law says that the court may direct the delivery of the exact goods. So this means that the court has the power to decide whether it should order specific performance or not. It is not automatic that the buyer will be granted this remedy. The court will look at the nature of the goods and the circumstances of the case before deciding. Example, court does not grant specific performance, so common goods. So, for example, Anna buys 100 sacks of ordinary rice from Ben. Then Ben refuses to deliver. So the buyer's remedy could be Anna asked the court to order Ben to deliver those exact sacks. Now, the court's decision, um, the court will say that rice is a common commodity, or Anna can buy the same type of rice from countless suppliers, or it is not necessary to force Ben to deliver those exact sacks. So the specific performance there is denied. So the court will award damages instead, for example, price difference, losses, not that actual sacks. So what's the reason? Because the goods are not unique and can be replaced easily. Okay, so when the court will usually not grant specific performance, so the court usually not grant specific performance if the goods are common, generic, or easily available in the market. The court will normally not compel the seller to deliver the exact goods. This is because the buyer can easily buy a substitute from somewhere else. For example, the seller fails to deliver 50 sacks of rice, let's say. These are ordinary goods that can be bought from many suppliers. So the court may simply award damages instead of forcing the seller to deliver. Because again, specific performance is unnecessary when a substitute is easy to find. Okay, so let's move on to when the court should grant specific performance. So the court should grant specific performance if the goods are unique, rare, or have a special or irreplaceable value. The court will generally order the seller to deliver that exact item. So, for example, a buyer purchases a specific painting. So this artwork is unique, of course, unique and cannot be replaced by any amount or money or a similar item. So the reason is money cannot compensate for the loss of a unique object. So the buyer here entered the contract specifically to acquire the exact thing. All right. For the last one, court may impose terms and conditions. So when a court orders specific performance under Article 1598, that is when it orders the seller to deliver the exact goods. The court may also add fair and reasonable conditions to ensure justice for both parties. So this is because specific performance is an equitable remedy. So court must make sure the outcome is balanced or fair, not one-sided. So even if the buyer is entitled to the goods, the court may require the buyer to pay the price if not yet paid, or pay interest if there was delay. Also, pay additional cost like storage, handling, or preservation, and allow damages to the seller. So, example here, Lara buys, or Anna, let's say Anna buys a specific antique cabinet. So the seller refuses to deliver the antique cabinet. So the court orders a specific performance. This is to the delivery of the exact cabinet. So the condition imposed is the court requires Anna to pay the remaining balance before delivery. So why? Because this ensures fairness. The seller gives the cabinet and then the buyer pays the price. So basically, Articles 1597 and 1598 balance the rights of both parties in a sale. In Article 1597, the seller is protected when the buyer breaches before delivery, while 1598 or Article 1598, on the other hand, the buyer is protected when the seller refuses to deliver unique or identified goods. So that's all for Article 1597 and Article 1598.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this discussion on a very important provision in the law on sales, Article 1599 of the Civil Code. This outlines the remedies available to a buyer when there is a breach of warranty by the seller. This topic is crucial because it defines the buyer's rights and available legal recourses when the goods purchased do not conform to the seller's assurances or warranties. Buyer's remedies. Article 1599 provides the buyer with 3 alternative remedies when a seller breaches a warranty. It's vital to remember that these remedies are alternative, meaning once the buyer chooses and is granted one, they generally cannot pursue another. The remedies can be grouped into 3 main categories. 1, recoupment or reduction or extinction of price. 2, action for damages, counterclaim or separate suit. 3, rescission or cancellation of the contract. Let's discuss each of these in detail. Remedy 1, recoupment. The first remedy under Article 1599, Paragraph 1, Subparagraph 1 is accept or keep the goods and set up against the seller. The breach of warranty by way of recoupment in diminution or extinction of the price. What is recoupment? Recoupment is the act of rebating or recouping a part of a claim upon which one is sued. Think of it as a deduction or reduction in the purchase price. In practice, the buyer keeps the goods even with the defect, but argues that the price should be lowered because the goods did not meet the warranty. In theory, the seller's damages, or the amount they can claim for the price, are cut down to an amount that compensates them only for the value of what they actually gave to the buyer. Example of recoupment. Imagine S sells B 50 boxes of guaranteed fresh apples for 20,000 each. Upon delivery, B discovers that 15 boxes are rotten, valued at 6,000. If S sues B for the 20,000 price, B can use recoupment. B's liability is reduced from 20,000 to 14,000. That is 20,000 less 6,000. B keeps the good apples and only pays for their value. Remedy 2, action for damages. The second category involves seeking damages, which is broken down into 2 options under the law. 1, accept or keep the goods and maintain an action against the seller for damages for the breach of warranty. Article 1599, Paragraph 1, Subparagraph 2. This is often used as a counterclaim if the seller sues for the price. The buyer keeps the goods and sues the seller for the loss caused by the breach. 2. Refuse to accept the goods and maintain an action against the seller for damages for the breach of warranty. Article 1599, paragraph 1, subparagraph 3. Here, the buyer rejects the goods entirely and then sues for damages, which would cover the loss of the bargain. Recoupment versus counterclaim, action for damages. While both reduce the buyer's payment, there is a technical distinction. Goal and basis. The feature is goal. The recoupment in Article 1599, paragraph 1 is to reduce or extinguish the price, while its counterclaim or action for damages in Article 1599, paragraph 2 is to enforce the seller's obligation or warranty and deduct the loss from the price. The feature is basis. Recoupment in Article 1599, paragraph 1 is avoidance of the contract, substituting a quasi-contractual obligation for the value received. While the counterclaim or action for damages in Article 1599, paragraph 2 is enforcing both sides of the contract in the same litigation. The measure of damages, a very specific rule for calculating loss in a breach of warranty of quality, is provided in Article 1599, subparagraph 5. The loss in the difference between the value of the goods at the time of delivery to the buyer and the value they would have had if they had answered to the warranty. Example, you buy a car for 1 million, warranted to be brand new. It is delivered but found to be an old model worth only 700,000. The damage is 300,000, 1 million less 700,000. In Remedy 3, rescission or cancellation, found in Article 1599, paragraph 1, subparagraph 4, is rescind the contract of sale and refuse to receive the goods. Or if the goods have already been received, return them or offer to return them to the seller and recover the price or any part thereof which has been paid. The basis and effect of rescission. The basis, the buyer has not received what they bargained for. The action, the contract is canceled as if it never existed. The buyer must return or offer to return the goods. The buyer is no longer liable for the price. The seller must repay any part of the price already paid. Now, when is rescission not allowed? The crucial limitations. The law provides 3 instances where the buyer loses the right to rescind. Article 1599, paragraph 3. 1. Acceptance with knowledge and without protest. If the buyer knew of the breach of warranty when they accepted the goods and did not protest the defect. 2. Failure to notify. If the buyer fails to notify the seller of the election to rescind within a reasonable time. 3. Failure to return in good condition. If the buyer fails to return or offer to return the goods in substantially as good condition as they were at the time of transfer of ownership. Important exception. If the deterioration or injury of the goods is due to the breach of warranty itself, this deterioration shall not prevent the buyer from rescinding the sale. For example, if the goods rot because of a quality defect, The buyer can still return the rotten goods. Now, what are the rights of the buyer in case of rescission? What happens if the seller refuses to accept the returned goods after a proper offer to rescind? Article 1599, paragraph 5. The buyer is thereafter deemed to hold the goods as bailey for the seller. A bailey is a person who holds property entrusted to them by another. The buyer also has a lien on the goods to secure the payment of any portion of the price they have already paid. This lien gives the buyer the remedies of an unpaid seller, like the right to resell the goods, to recover the money they paid. Remedies are alternative. Let's return to the principle of alternative remedies, Article 1599, paragraph 2. When the buyer has claimed and been granted a remedy in any one of these ways, no other remedy can thereafter be granted. This emphasizes the buyer's election of a remedy. You cannot, for example, successfully claim recoupment or reduction of price and then later sue for full rescission. The single exception. The only exception is found by cross-referencing Article 1191, paragraph 2, which deals with reciprocal obligations. If the buyer chose fulfillment or specific performance or enforcement of the contract, and it should become impossible, the buyer may still sue for rescission. For example, if the buyer chooses to compel the seller to fix the warranted defect, but the repair is impossible or the seller fails to perform, the buyer can then switch to rescission. In summary, Article 1599 provides robust protections for the buyer against a seller's breach of warranty, giving the buyer the power to choose among 1. Recoupment or reduction of the price, 2. Action for damages, sue for losses while keeping or rejecting the goods, 3. Rescission, cancel the sale, return the goods, and recover the price. The key takeaway is the concept of election of remedies. Choose wisely, as once granted, your other options are foreclosed. Thank you for your attention. I am now open for questions.